house prices, they rise massively in major cities around the world. Higher prices, this should encourage firms to build more houses, right? The US alone is short of 4 million houses. This could approximately take 7 years to fix this shortage. This is what economists call inelastic supply. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I am a fellow student who topped in GCSE Economics last year in Oman. In this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer, and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, we're going to be looking at the concept of price elasticity of supply. Let's get started. The price elasticity of supply. I want you to think about the same structure as we looked at in the previous video. If you haven't seen the previous video, please do check it out. It's on the price elasticity of demand. So let's start off with the definition of price elasticity of supply. I want you to think about this similar to PED. So it is also the measure of responsiveness, but in this case, it is of quantity supplied to a change in price. And there is a formula yet again. The formula goes by this. So last time we said it's percentage change of quantity demanded over percentage change of price, and this time it is percentage change of quantity supplied, percentage change quantity supplied over percentage change in pricing. Yet again, you can remember it with the analogy UQ before UP. I'm not going to explain that any further. Let's move on. Then when we look at this, we look at two ways of interpreting the formulas. So whenever you have the interpretations of the price elasticities, you look at two ways of interpreting it. You look at the sign and you look at the size. So when you look at the sign, in PED it is negative, showing the inverse relationship, but as we know, supply and price are positively related. So for the sign, in this case, it's a positive sign because they are positively related. So when when prices increase, supply increases, and vice versa. When you look at the size, yet again it shows the extent by which supply extends or contracts. What does extend mean and what does contract mean? Contract is when supply decreases and extend is when supply increases. So we've looked at the formulas, we've looked at how to interpret these formulas. Let's move on to the degrees of elasticity. So this is quite similar to the last one, but yet again you have to change it in order to match the idea of supply. So the first one you have is when PES equals infinity. Now let's try and take a look at this through the diagram. So when you look at this diagram, you have supply that is somewhat like this. It's horizontal supply. So essentially at the same price, there's multiple quantities. So the quantity could increase or decrease. So there is a massive change in quantity supplied in relation to the change in price. This is called, you guessed it right, perfectly elastic supply. The second type is when PES equals 0. Now this can be depicted with this diagram. This is when you have a vertical supply curve. So essentially, the quantity remains the same, but there could be multiple changes in prices. So there is relatively very less change in quantity supplied in relation to the change in price. Now, this is called perfectly inelastic supply. Now, the third possibility or the third degree of elasticity is when PES equals 1. What does this mean? Now, if you remember, this in the case of PED is when the diagram of demand is 45 degrees. Quite similarly, in this case, supply should also be about 45 degrees. So your change in supply should match the change in the pricing. So this is when the percentage change in quantity supplied equals the percentage change in the price. And this is called unitary elastic supply. Now, the fourth degree of elasticity is when PES is greater than 1. This can be seen through this diagram. So, if you remember, we looked at perfectly elastic as somewhat like a horizontal curve. And as we know, supply is upward sloping. So, if we have a diagram that's somewhat horizontal, relatively, and upward sloping, we have got a diagram that shows relatively elastic supply. What do you mean by relatively elastic? So there is comparatively or relatively more change in quantity supplied over the change in price. The last degree of elasticity is when PES is greater than 0 but lesser than 1. Now this can be seen through this. So if you remember, we saw that in the case of perfectly inelastic, it's somewhat vertical. So we make the supply close to vertical. We make it close to vertical. And this shows that there is a relatively lesser change in quantity supplied in relation to the change in prices. So this is called relatively inelastic supply. Now we've looked at the 5 degrees of elasticity along with the diagrams. We've looked at the formula for elasticity and we've defined what price elasticity of supply means. But what really determines the PES, the price elasticity of supply? What determines it? So essentially there are just 3 main factors. So you look at the time taken to produce the good. You look at the costs of producing the good. And you look at the feasibility to store the good. Now all this will determine whether or not changes in pricing could lead to the change in quantity supplied. If you think this video helps you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you in the next week again.